Here's my question for you today, Don Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
Are you good? Because I'm good. I'm good.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
I'm good, by the way. The phrase that I use to tell my wife, I don't need any more salt on my eggs. And also what a wizard uses to announce their alignment. Same coincidence.
It works for Dungeons and Dragons. I guess it works for him too.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. I am David Chen.
And I'm fine. Or sorry, I'm good. Excuse me. And I'm good. Yes. I'm Don Marshall.
Welcome to the podcast. On this episode of Decoding TV, we are going to be discussing Season 1, Episode 8 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Alloyed.
Aloyd,
yes.
if you played
Horizon
the
Forbidden
video.
West, right?
There we go. I knew I
Aloyd.
liked you. Yeah. All right.
Alloyed. I apologize. I don't know. I already this is off to a bad start. But anyway,
you know what? It's fine. It's fine. We're starting the way we always want to, with chaos. And look, people already harped on you for mispronouncing Adar. Let's not get into it.
It's Adar, right? It's Adar.
It's Adar. Yeah, it's not.
You've drilled that into me. So okay. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. And find us on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube at Decoding TV. All right, before we get into today's episode, there's a few announcements we want to make. First of all, I just want to say up top that it has been an absolute delight to recap this season of Decoding TV. The Rings of Power on Decoding TV with Don Marshall. Don and I have never worked together on anything before. I suspected it would go well. In my opinion, it's gone swimmingly. I've had such a great time talking with Don each week, and I find Don's gentle demeanor in walking me through the world, the lands of Middle Earth, to be very irresistible. So, Don, I just want to acknowledge up top, thank you for taking a chance on me and on Decoding TV. I hope you've had a good time as well.
I have had a wonderful time. Thank you so much, David. For those listening on the audio-only forums, I am blushing very hard right now. Mm-hmm. David, it has been an absolute pleasure discussing this show with a filthy casual such as yourself. And I, for one, had a wonderful time explaining the lore.
Well, thanks for all the people who have supported us and listened to us this season. I do want to mention Decoding TV as a podcast will continue. We will be covering more shows in the future, and I'll have a lot more to announce within the next 2 weeks. Still working out some final details of what our next shows will be. So just keep it tuned in to the Decoding TV podcast feed at podcast.decodingtv.com. Lots of announcements in the future. They're very exciting. It's going to be great. So,
all right.
Yeah. I also want to mention, of course, for paid members at decodingtv.com, we are planning to do at least one more bonus episode before we wrap up on Rings of Power for this season. So probably in the next couple weeks, we'll get a bonus episode onto the decodingtv.com bonus feed, premium feed. So you can look forward to that if you are a paid member. Don Marshall, somebody made a suggestion to me this last week, and I was like, this is such a great suggestion. I'm sad we didn't implement it further, sooner. But somebody had suggested, hey, David Chen, the no spoiler policy on Decoding TV is really killing me with Rings of Power, because they want access to Don Marshall's brilliance, and I'm holding them back from it. Is what's happening. So they're like, I really want to hear what Don Marshall has to say in terms of book spoilers. So what I should have done earlier this season, and what we're gonna do at the end of this episode is have a section that's just book spoilers for The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. So we're not going to do it for the main episode, so if you're just a show watcher, you can still enjoy that. But at the end of the episode, I am ready to hear some book spoilers at this point. My sense is, Don, that they've deviated so far from the books in many ways that it's still going to be interesting to me regardless, because, assuming I continue watching the show, it will be interesting to see how they, what the differences are and the choices they made. So,
yes. So yeah. I will say this just to kind of preface anybody who maybe wants to take part in that. I will potentially spoil a lot, but I don't necessarily see it as they've deviated so far from the lore rather than the Second Age. We don't get like a book the way we do The Hobbit or the trilogy. We get like plot points, like the thing that happens at the end of this episode with some we're assuming people have already seen the episode if they're listening to this.
Yes. So we're going to spoil the season finale of season 1. Yep.
Yes. So plot point 1, they make the rings. Plot point 2, there's probably going to be a defeat of Sauron. Like there are little bits and pieces that we get here and there, but not like dialogue and stuff. So instead of, I think, deviating, I would say they are filling in the blanks. And this show really has just become an opinion piece on, do you like how they filled in that blank? And if the answer is yes, then
you mean
great.
This podcast you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll try to do a little bit of like book spoilers at the end of this episode. So look forward to that. Okay. And then finally, I wanted to read an email that someone wrote into decodingtv@gmail.com. This is from Matt from Washington. And I thought this is a pretty good email. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I thought it was a good email. So this email comes in from Matt. He writes, "First, I thoroughly enjoy the show. Look forward to more collaboration between you two." Me too, Matt from Washington.
Likewise.
I wanted to write in about your last episode and get some thoughts about the show and your thoughts about it. While I don't think the show is perfect, you have raised valid criticism. I think I've enjoyed the show more than it sounds like you have, especially this last episode. I'm in total agreement that the death of Isildur doesn't work at all and was a miscue, but I wanted to provide a different perspective on the last episode. So he's referring to season 1, episode 7, The Eye, which, by the way, is the second episode that I watched last week entitled The Eye from a Prestige TV show. The other one being Andor, also reviewed on Decoding TV. Both of you expressed some dissatisfaction that the show decided not to kill off any characters in the aftermath of Mount Doom's explosion. I absolutely think that's a valid perspective, and I wouldn't be shocked at all to know that more people feel the same as you, but I have a theory that there's more expectation of character death after the cultural phenomenon of HBO's Game of Thrones. It's not exactly a secret that George R.R. Martin was inspired by Tolkien's work, but wanted a more realistic or brutal bend to it. One of the hallmarks of Martin's work is that actions always have consequences, often bloody and cruel. There's sex, brutality, and death in Martin's fantasy world, which stands in fairly stark contrast to Tolkien's work. Game of Thrones was an incredible show that grabbed the general population's attention like few other shows before it. I wonder if we, as a general audience, expect more Martin-esque storytelling as kind of a new default. If you think back to the Lord of the Rings films or the original Fellowship, only Boromir dies. Spoilers for the Lord of the Rings films. The rest survive, not counting Gandalf, he comes back from the dead. And the Fellowship faced some truly stunning odds and foes. Thinking back on those original books and films, many characters would have likely died if George R.R. Martin was in charge of storytelling. I don't think either form of storytelling is superior. I enjoy both Lord of the Rings and Rings of Power. I just think it's a perfect example of the difference. I'm sorry. I think a perfect example of the difference is actually when Elrond and Durin have the conversation about the elves needing Mithril to save themselves. Elrond just tells Durin the truth, and the conflict is resolved using words and the truth. In contrast, Ned Stark tries to be honorable and loses his head for it. The last thing I'll mention is that there's one thing that died in the last episode, the Southlands. While there are no major characters who died, the world was dramatically altered forever. Our main group went from a victory feast to Pompeii in no time at all. I think they would have killed some characters off. They could have killed some characters off, and I don't think it would have been the wrong choice, but I do think there were significant impacts in the world of Middle-earth. If you've read this far, thank you, love the show, and you too, end quote. So, this is representative of many sort of messages I got via tweets and emails of people saying like, hey, David, there were things that were changed. The Southlands became Mordor, for one. Good thing we dealt with that this episode, by the way. And also like Queen Muriel lost her sight, obviously, and I think that's probably going to reverberate throughout next season. But also
we lost Valandil. Don't forget about Valandil. You forgot about Valandil, didn't you?
Wasn't it Ontama? Are you talking about Ontama?
Oh shoot! Oh no!
Owned, Don.
Oh
Owned.
No! I got the name wrong. All right, thanks for coming to the show, everybody. I'm gonna go.
Goodbye, Don. This podcast is at an end.
No,
I think you're referring to Ontamo.
I am referring to Ontamo.
Wow, the first Dave and Chen correction of Don Marshall on the podcast.
Oh God!
And
never gonna live this down.
Yeah. So Ontamo died. Yes, but okay. So they bring up Boromir, but here's the thing about Boromir. At least that was a major character. You know what I'm saying?
Fair.
At least it's a character whose name you remember, and is a like a memorable character. So
yeah.
Okay. As for the Southlands going away, I think mixed on this, because on the one hand, yes, the Southlands are changed forever. We got a little bit of a taste of the Southlands, like. You know, this has been an open question, by the way, that was asked like last couple weeks, is like, what is the Southlands? Is it literally just this village, or is it like, are there thousands more people out there in the Southlands? Because when everyone's like, it's king, you're the king of the South, like Halbrand is king of the Southlands, everyone was like, is he just king of these like 30 people, or are there more people? Like, what is the Southlands?
I think the implication was that village they go to in episode 2 is like the second village, and then they are little villages
doing
spread
a tour.
around.
They're doing a patrol of all the Southlands.
Yeah, I don't think the Southlands is just those 2 villages, but it probably would have helped if we had like some sort of enormous helicopter map shot with tons of different villages sprinkled in, and then they zoom in on this one because it's where the tunnel is. Like, yeah. That's an interesting point, though, that I kind of like that email. And this is what I love so much about the Tolkien community, is that it always gives me something else to think about in a different perspective. Because now that I am thinking about it, I guess I do have a little bit of like influence from the George R.R. Martin thing. Because Tolkien, when Tolkien kills off his characters, he either does it, the millions of nameless warriors at once, or these really big dramatic deaths of main characters, i.e. Boromir and, a number of others, especially in the movies.
I think it's a totally fair point to make. I do think, I don't know. I do think movies are different than TV shows, but also like the language of the TV show, the visual language of the TV show was, you have these freaking lava flows coming in and just owning people left and right, and then to show that and then not have anyone die is a disappointment. But okay, let's tackle the Southlands thing, right?
Sure.
As we've just discussed, like, not super clear what the Southlands was, other than this very beautiful place that had at least 2 villages in it. But I think also the way that the Southlands became Mordor was a little bit of an anticlimax. Like, if you think about how it happened, I'm going to describe the sequence of events.
Okay, please.
Arondir hides this blade that's incredibly crucial to the plan. He hides this blade. He does a shit job of hiding the blade. Okay, because obviously Theo sees that he's hidden the blade.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the blade is critical to Adar's plans. We don't know how. And then Theo gives up the blade, and then Adar gives it to this guy, Waldreg, who runs off and then puts it in the build a Mordor kit, and then like twists the handle.
What?
And then like all of a sudden it's Mordor, right? You know what I'm saying? So I'm just like that is the secret. That is literally what is in the show that led up to the creation of Mordor. So I am. That's not that sequence of events I just described does not get me fully invested in like. There's no like, hey, we have to prevent the blade from going in this thing, or else more like none of that is set up. Right?
Oh, wait! I just thought of something really cool that they could have done that I'm upset that they didn't. Mm-hmm. This would have been so cool.
Is this a spoiler for the spoilers stuff?
No, this isn't even a spoiler.
Ahead,
this is just something that I thought might have been fun. What if you have Adar be in the tower fighting with Arondir, and Arondir is trying to plunge, and he's fighting Arondir with the blade. And wait, it gets better. You take them fighting in this tower, this destroyed tower, and Arondir's got the blade, and he goes to stab Arondir, and like he's trying to, or not stab Arondir, he's trying to stab it inside the little lock key thing that unlocks it, and Arondir puts his hand out and tries to block it with his own flesh, and it goes right through the flesh, and he turns the key, and I just came up with that, and that would have been a little bit more dramatic.
The point being, I think that I don't believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but I don't believe they're like, we got to prevent the blade from getting into this keyhole thing, or else or else terrible things are going to happen, right?
That was never brought up, and that is not a spoiler in anything. This is a fill in the blank.
It's another instance in which, in a show, in a season full of instances where the showrunners have opted for surprise instead of suspense, instead of tension. It's like, aha, it's Mordor. Look. I'm like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. That's right. And that's actually a problem of the storytelling, is that it would have been nice to know what the stakes were of like, hey, if they get the blade, then all this stuff happens. But then like you have to then seed all that stuff earlier. You have to like create scenes that have tension of like Arondir trying to hide the blade and Theo, and all this stuff that the show doesn't put in the work to do. So you're right. You're right. People like Matt from Washington, who I really appreciated this email and I thought they were great points. You're right that the Southlands did become Mordor. The way in which it did so was completely bereft of any suspense, tension, or stakes. In my opinion.
Are you familiar with Chekhov's gun? Are you familiar with Chekhov's gun?
I am familiar with Chekhov's gun.
Yeah,
yes.
This feels very much like we needed a little bit less of an aha moment and more of a contextual Chekhov's gun for this. Basically, give us the tension, have us know everything from the start. I believe we mentioned this last week with
we talked about
Stranger
this last week,
and how we probably should have
or literally everything in this episode of the show, I would argue. But anyway, let's get to it. Let's get to it. Okay?
Let's get into it.
Season 1, Episode 8. What has been so valuable about this season of Decoding TV to me is like I'm like all of a sudden getting randomly emotional, maybe because I didn't sleep very well last night. But like one of the things that I get to do with Decoding TV and A Cast of Kings, working with folks like Don Marshall and Kim Renfro and so on, is like I do get to experience like what the fandom of these shows is like, and I don't take it lightly. I don't take it lightly that I get to kind of be tangentially a part of it. At the same time, and it's been an honor to kind of like walk with the show alongside you, Don Marshall. But I also need to kind of stand in my own truth of how I feel about the show.
Totally
and
fair.
The thoughts you're about to hear are reflective of that. So, Don, I'm curious your overall thoughts on season 1, episode 8. Season 1, episode 8 of Rings of Power.
This episode continues my thought for this overall season. It was fine. It continues to have really poignant moments that are interrupted by an overall story that is
by an overall story, period.
But yeah, that may not be as strong as many would like it to be. A lot of high points overall throughout this season. A couple of high points this episode that I thought were really well done, that show the show's potential and promise. And a decent number of questionable things that, while I think were not the best, I think if we can just get rid of it for season 2, get rid of the aha moments, get rid of these unearned, majestic scenes, I think season 2 is going to be great. Are they going to do this? I have no idea. But overall, I gave it a 6. I usually don't do out of 10 ratings.
Yes.
Because I think it takes away from a lot of the nuance. It takes away from a lot of the discussion that we're about to have. But if I were to sum it all up, I'd give it about a 6.7 out of 10, a 67 out of 100, and so on and so forth until you reach a billion.
Wow, your number has forced me to kind of reconceptualize what I feel about it. Like, first of all, that's harsh. That's a D+, basically, right?
I don't believe in number grading systems.
Okay.
Doctors Google things all the time. So do lawyers. Don't. The internet has made the whole letter grade system unnecessary.
All right, fair enough. Okay, I will not translate it to D+.
Sorry, your thoughts on this then.
I thought it was pretty rough overall. I'm not gonna lie. Couple high points. I think the show has never lacked for craft, right? When it comes to the artistry, the production design of the show, when it comes to the cinematography, even just the lighting, which is obviously very closely associated with cinematography.
Yeah,
those things have always been strong in the show, and this show this episode continues to really deliver on those fronts, often to a transcendently good degree. Like often there's several scenes that are like, wow, that looks amazing. You know, like worth watching just to see how that looked, you know? But I think it was a pretty rough episode. Because here's the most damning thing I can say about it is I felt almost nothing watching the episode, right? And I think there's many moments in the episode where you're supposed to feel something. They clearly want you to feel something. And it's because I feel the storytelling this season has been so all over the place, has been so rushed, and also somehow spinning its wheels at the same time that I felt nothing. I'll just give one really strong example. There is another TV show that shall remain nameless that had an old king die this week. And it is possibly one of the most powerful television episodes, certainly this year, possibly ever. It really was an incredible experience for me to watch it. In this episode, an old king died, and it's like, okay, you know, like there's nothing, there's no build up to it at all. There's no like, what are the stakes here? There's you don't feel like what are the negative consequences from this at all. It is just a textbook comparison of how you do a plot line like that well versus poorly. And that's just one of like several examples. But you know, and we've already touched upon it, that the show has opted for surprise instead of building this kind of narrative, like emotional investment with these characters all season. There have been bizarre, strange coincidences that have happened all season, and that have led to what has happened in this episode. And it's just kind of like, okay, like I don't know why one thing led to another in a lot of what happened to this show. And we'll dive into some specific examples. But overall, I would say I was very, very disappointed by the finale. And I also just found, in terms of its construction, I found it to be totally baffling as a finale episode.
Should have ended at episode 6.
For the following reasons. We don't visit 2 of our major locations at all. Including yours and my favorite one, I think, right?
Which
is
the arguably the strongest.
Arguably the strongest, the Durin Disa story. Like, not even in the finale at all. So it's like, oh, okay.
That's a pacing issue. Yeah.
So those characters I know will be important in season 2, right? And like is my guess based on what's happened. And the Bronwyn Arendir storyline, I have a lot of questions about, like. What was the point of all that? What was the point of all that, Don? Because we probably could have gotten this whole season through with no Bronwyn and Arendir at all, and based on what has happened in this episode. Yeah, and so it's weird. We spent so much time with those characters this season, so much time. It's weird the things that the show chose to spend time on and not spend time on in this episode. It really did feel like not a finale. It felt like, oh, next episode we're gonna get to the resolution of the Durin, Bronwyn, Arendir stuff in 18 to 24 months, which is whenever that episode's gonna come out. So it's just like, it's just really odd from just a general finale, for a normal finale episode. It felt really odd to not at least check in with all the different characters.
Yep.
Okay. Those are overall thoughts.
It's going to be a fun episode.
Yep,
all right, here we go. Let's do
it. Let's dive into it. Okay. So, the Harfoots. I will say that one of the things this episode did give me is a lot of fun imagining if Don was wrong and you would need to change his name to Don Marshall on TikTok.
So happy.
I started watching the episode. I was literally about to text you midway through the episode and be like, wow, Don, I guess you got that one wrong. And also, it made me super glad that we covered this topic at the beginning of the podcast last week, because if we hadn't, Don, it would have made me look pretty silly. Okay?
Can I just say something very quickly?
Go ahead.
number one, again, can only apologize for not bringing it up sooner. But at the same time, I didn't want to sully your appreciation of Halbrand as a character or the stranger as a character, just in case I was wrong. But yeah, I would say like 9 or 10 of my actual theories have been dead on arrival, but every once in a while there's like, that scene in Brooklyn Nine-Nine where the chief goes, "Vindication!" I felt that to a much lesser extent because it wasn't like a yay. It was more like a okay. Yeah.
Was there any moment in time, even for a split second, when you thought that the stranger might be Sauron?
Before,
in this episode?
In this episode, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so when these 3 characters, you call them the Dwellers. They have a name, right?
They each have
Nomad, the Ascetic, and something
the
else.
Mystic, right? I think
the Mystic, the Ascetic, the Nomad. They have like 3 different names in the closed captions. But the Dwellers, you call them the Dwellers, the Mystics, whatever. They approach the stranger and they're like, "You're Sauron. You need to go east to Rune in order to learn the truth, because a veil has been cast over your eyes to keep you from seeing the truth." Right? Was there any moment that you doubted the theory that Halbrand is Sauron?
There was like a split second, but like no. For the most part, I'm just like, this feels like a red herring. It felt too heavy-handed, on the nose. Is that the right phrase to use here?
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess.
But this kind of harkens back to my thought about what we were talking about earlier and what we were talking about in episode 7. It would have been nice to know if he was, Gandalf from the beginning. I think it would have accomplished a little bit more to see the journey he goes on rather than wonder about theories on Twitter. Now, it's been fun theorizing. But in this particular case, I went, "Yeah, he's Gandalf."
Well, I don't know that they had that much of a journey this season. That's what I'm saying. Is like maybe they didn't have it. I don't know that there was that much there, other than who he is. Right? They go on their trip and then they have this encounter, and that's literally the whole story of the stranger this season.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know that there was that much there to go on. But anyway, okay, so you weren't fooled at all. I do think that this is a reveal that the show did set up. Like
they did set it up
pretty well.
Yes.
It's like, okay, it's very clear we're supposed to try to wonder who this guy is to a significant degree. To a lesser degree, Halbrand. It's not like the show did see it in some things where you're like, who is this guy? As we discussed last week.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as strong.
No.
Because Halbrand has a name. Halbrand has a name, and he has an express purpose, and he is already a character. If he turned out to be King of the South or whatever, it wouldn't have been a shock. Right?
There's an alternate universe somewhere where instead of giving him the name Halbrand, they gave him the name the Stranger.
Yeah, perhaps. Anyway, so one of the 3 mystics pretends to be Nori to
trick the Harfoots.
To trick the stranger.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Very creepy visual.
I don't know why that was necessary, because if they just showed up as themselves, wouldn't that have the stranger also have wanted to know what that was?
David, no thoughts, just vibes.
Okay, yes, it's so true. So then a big fight ensues where they're like, "Hey, we need you to come with us and reveal your truth as Sauron," and then the Harfoots come and they're like, "No, you're actually good. You can choose." And it's like, can he? Like, what would have happened if he went with them? Like, would he have found out that he wasn't Sauron? And then, what are the stakes here, Don? Do you know?
The stakes are not high. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
That's all I'll say there. I don't know. And because I don't know, I'm less invested. And again, I try and approach this, again, having met most of the actors and approaching this from a positive standpoint. I very much want to look at the positive in this, but looking at this through a writing perspective, from a story arc perspective, there wasn't really much here. The fight scene was really cool. I loved the floating in midair and the rocks floating around him and the fire and I thought that was well done.
I think him saying "I'm good" is, I would say, one of the worst lines I've heard on a TV show this year to convey a specific idea. I thought it was very silly. Like, it's kind of like, and I don't think it was intentionally silly. That's me personally. But I do think the effect of what happens when he's like, "I'm good," and then he like blasts those mystics away, and like you see their skeletons and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that was a really cool like visual effect.
Yeah.
But I was reading Eric Kane's review of this episode on Forbes.com, and he's like, the character says, "I'm good," making me question everything I think I know about good screenwriting in Hollywood. A character saying "I'm good" is just a very like inartful way of revealing that they're good. You know,
you want to know you want to see me pull this one out of my head.
Okay, pull it.
A king that has to say he is the king is no king.
Oh shit!
Yeah, bringing it back to Game of Thrones.
Dang,
yeah,
dropping the true lines here. I think that there were ways to
show don't tell,
make us more invested in this, which is like, is it by bringing up the name Sauron, they're like depending on our knowledge of who Sauron is to like be like, ooh, that's evil guy, and then it's like, does he actually have a choice? Can he choose to be Sauron? I don't even know. Right? I don't think he can.
We will get into that in a moment. Actually, when we do the other stuff, that brings up an interesting point. I'm actually kind of glad you mentioned it. I hadn't thought about that.
I don't think he can, because Sauron's like a one dude, I think, who takes many forms and stuff.
Sauron is one dude who takes many forms, but whether or not he can choose to be who we know he is potentially up for a little bit of debate. I won't go into that too much.
Yeah, but that's whether Sauron can choose, though. Like I can potentially get invested in, but the stranger is like, he's either Sauron or he's not.
Oh yes, no. From that kind of perspective, no. The stranger can't choose to be if he's Sauron.
So it's just odd that they set it up like, oh, you can choose to be good, and it's like, well, he's either Sauron or he's not. Like, you can't choose to be Sauron or not, right?
It probably could have been phrased a little bit differently. I took it as it doesn't matter if they say you're Sauron or that your powers are evil or that you are going to be a slave. It's more along the lines of, if you don't want to do that, it is your free will to be able to say, no, I don't want that. I don't care what you say I am. And yes,
the mystics would have gotten back to the land it would have gotten to Rune with the stranger and then been like, I've made a huge tiny mistake, which would be the second. Go ahead.
There is the potential. Yes, they've made a lot of huge mistakes. These three, but there is always the potential that like, it's sort of like you are shaped by the argument that you can be shaped by your environment if you don't know who you are, like the nature versus nurture. So like, had the stranger never met the Harfoots, maybe Gandalf turns out to be evil. And I feel like that's kind of what they were implying, like without...
I just wish they hadn't used the name Sauron. I wish they had said like, hey, guess what? You're like one of the great evil wizards of all time.
Yeah.
And you can choose to come with us, but then the Harfoots are like, no, you don't need to be an evil wizard. And he's like, I choose to be good. Like, that's a cool thing. But like the idea that he's Sauron and it just literally makes it a mistaken identity. It's not... He has no actual... there's no actual journey for that character other than he's remembering who he was.
Right.
That's it. There's no choice in the matter, right?
Exactly. And I think the journey could have been a little bit more strongly represented had we gotten we know he is Gandalf, and now it becomes a fight between the Harfoot's goodness and the Dwellers' evil to go back and forth. And that arguably would have been a little bit more of for me at least, a more compelling arc throughout the season. Let's see the mystics show up in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and each time, there's this push and pull, and maybe the Harfoots win this episode with Poppy's song, and then the mystics win that episode. Like, you see him go off with the mystics, and then it's like, no, I'm going to go get him. He can be turned. We've seen all of the good he's done, but we've also seen the evil he's done. I feel like that probably would have been a bit more of a stronger character arc for this relatively unknown character, even if we didn't know he was Gandalf from the beginning.
Yeah.
So
at every step of the way, the showrunners and writers have chosen surprise rather than developing a longer, more detailed, more nuanced, or satisfying story.
Which leads me,
one example. Go ahead.
Which leads me to believe that I think it's really hard to look. And again, I'm kind of doing like a season overview, but this is sort of where we're at. It leads me to think that they're certainly going for 50 hours of storytelling instead of a one season character arc where we pick up again next time and they're the same, but they've gone through this sort of point in the story. So it definitely feels like they're going for 50 hours of television. It also leads me to believe that they're kind of going for more of a community driven discussion on the who's who, the Twitter topics, the Reddit threads, the
Don Marshall live casts,
Listen, I honestly though, I didn't really engage too much on TikTok for this exact reason, because I didn't make each episode as a review, because I kind of wanted to look at the whole season and judge it on its merits. And now that we're at that end, I'm going to be making a whole bunch of content about what I thought about it. But the whole episode by episode discussion, the threads, the Twitter thoughts, that's one way to do it. But I don't think this specific show and the style that Tolkien has lends itself to that kind of thing. Game of Thrones, sure. Breaking Bad, absolutely. I'm mentioning, really popular shows, but you could make the argument that it could be done for a lot of other TV. But I think they need to move a little bit faster.
Here's something that's helped me to process this show is, every episode, Don writes these like very lovely show notes, and we talk about like the plot of the show. And I think if you take each plot development in this episode and then add the phrase in front of it, wouldn't it be cool if? And then
that's our other bonus episode. We'll do another bonus episode for that.
And imagine if like someone in the writer's room said that. It explains a lot about what we see in the show. Wouldn't it be cool if like the Balrog just appeared all of a sudden, like this leaf woke him up? A lot of debate about whether the leaf actually woke him up.
I am in team did not wake him up.
Yeah,
it's
he was just there chilling. He was just there chilling. I mean, Don, everything in the show, like it's complete darkness. There's nothing going on. I guess he's just sleeping. Anyway, it's not like it dropped into an already flaming thing where he's like really angry already. It dropped. It's complete darkness, and then all of a sudden it appears as though he's woken up. So it's like, yes, maybe you're right that that's not what the show intended to convey. But it's like, wouldn't it be cool if it was complete darkness and all of a sudden the Balrog comes? Wouldn't it be cool if these mystics say this guy's Sauron, but he's actually not Sauron? It actually turns out to be Gandalf. I think in my when I was talking, I recap Andor on Decoding TV with my colleague Patrick Willems, and he says that it feels like a lot of latest Star Wars series have been like people mashing action figures together, like taking these action figures and be like, wouldn't that be cool if that, it's kind of what I feel about a lot of this, not all of the show, but like a lot of this show feels like, wouldn't it be cool if this happened, and without regard to the other components of the story. Okay, we've harped on this long enough. I apologize. Thank you for hearing me out. Okay, they do say he's not Sauron, he's the other, the Istari, which we later learn means wizard, right?
Yes, so that is a book thing that I'm glad they used. That I may also lead to some people not realizing that the stranger is Gandalf, because there are 4 other Istari, but there's a very on-the-nose phrase that is used that only works if you've seen the movies, and I appreciate them trying to pay homage to the movies, but wouldn't it have been cool if they did something else?
Interesting. Okay. Well, hey, for all my complaints that the show didn't kill anyone off last week,
they killed
the
someone
writers
else
heard me. The writers heard me. They're like, okay, we're gonna off Sadek. So Sadek dies, in this fight. And then he's like, and then he says, "Let me watch the sunrise at least." And then the sunrise then appears like 3 seconds afterwards, which kind of feels like the approach that this show takes in general of like, all right, yeah, sure, that's a thing that is going to happen immediately. Yeah.
No thoughts, just vibes. No thoughts.
I mean,
just vibes.
If you think about it, Don, all of the events of this show, including the forging of the 3 rings of the elves, happens in what appears to be the course of approximately 3 to 4 weeks. I'm not sure. My guess is it took a little bit longer in the books. But
I can't even speak to that because, again, a lot of this is filling in the blanks. It is a visual representation, and
there are approximately, I think, around like 17 scenes of Nori saying goodbye to the Harfoots. Her family decides, hey, you got to go off to be with the stranger. I
question this choice so much.
Well, it's more just like, I don't have a problem with it in concept, but it's like the question I asked. I had a debate I have a Slack group for one of my podcasts, the Filmcast, and we had a little bit of a discussion of why did this happen this way? Why this moment? The family is like, hey, you got to go off to be with the stranger. Did the stranger say, I need help? Does Nori's family know that the stranger needs help? Why is it they've chosen this moment to say, Nori, you're out of the family. Go off and be with me. You know, it doesn't feel character motivated to me. Yes, I understand that they believe that like she should be off and on her own anyway. Like that's a nice arc for them to come to that conclusion. I don't think the work was put into that arc all season.
Yeah, they didn't earn that one.
Right, but it just feels very sudden. Like there's nothing wrong with the idea of it. Of them like realizing, oh, Nori should be off on her own and having adventures. You know, that's a fine thing for them to decide. But just like, why did it happen this episode? And so it's just another thing. It's like, okay, that's a thing that happened. You know, I guess. I will say it's very exciting that Nori and the stranger, aka Gandalf, are going off alone. That's like, there's some cool adventures that could.
I think that's the thing that I mean when I say this show has potential. They have set things up because having watched the whole season now, it kind of felt like a prologue to what's actually supposed to be happening. Which, and again, there's a part of me that really hopes that is true, and it's like, okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. It's like, I really hope that I can look back on this and say, look, I liked it. If you can get through season 1, the rest of it is great. Just get it, and I hate that's kind of my mentality as like, it's not a recommendation right now because obviously we don't have the other seasons, but I'm very much hoping that the adventure we see Nori and the stranger on becomes a plot point. We're going to get to explore places we've never seen before, like Rune. We might see some of the Easterlings and their culture, and we may see some of the blue. Might have stopped myself. Might be a spoiler.
All right.
Yeah. We'll.
But you're excited at the potential of that storyline.
Yes, I'm excited at the potential, and I desperately want Poppy to follow them because she doesn't have anybody else, and everyone there is.
There's
kind
this
of
huge emotional goodbye between Nori and Poppy, and it's like, Poppy, why don't you just go with them, man?
Yeah,
like,
no, I really want the writers to listen to this note specifically. There's a very easy fix where you just find Poppy.
Cut to the three of them hanging out together, and Nori's like, "Boy, I sure am glad you decided to join us at the end." It's like, okay, hey, it's no more messy than anything else they've done this season. So,
or just make a previously on that was like, "Here's what's happened since season 1." Telegraph it for us, please. We were talking about that last week too. Oh.
So and I think at this point it is confirmed that the stranger is Gandalf. Correct?
Yes. There is a line that he says that Gandalf,
several lines. As far as
yes.
I can tell. Yeah.
I'm good is not one of them that indicates he is Gandalf.
It's not. I thought.
No,
you remember the big moment from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings where he's like, "I'm good," where Ian McKellen's like, "I'm good." Anyway, there were several lines that were said. Hit us with some of them, Don Marshall. Hit us with some of the lines that prove that the stranger is Gandalf.
Okay. One. He is not Sauron, he is the other, the Astari. There are only now 5 possible characters that he could be. Then the stranger says, always, something along the lines of, follow your nose. And that is a line that Gandalf says to the Hobbit Merry in the Fellowship of the Ring movie when Gandalf goes, oh, it's that way. And Mary goes, he's remembered. It's like, no, but the smell is not so bad down this way. Remember, something, always follow your nose. And I am taking my context clues that this show, as heavy-handed as it might be, is not stupid enough to throw us another surprise he's actually Saruman thing, or surprise he's actually Radagast thing. or he's a blue wizard to make him anyone other than Gandalf. If they do that, I will stop watching the show.
What?
Hard.
Wow.
You heard it here. I feel strongly
Damn.
about this. I will stop watching the show because at that point, it's gone so off the rails that I don't think I can continue with it.
Some would argue it has already gone off the rails with Gandalf being in the Second Age, right? Like, isn't he?
Yes, some would argue that. Here's why I don't care. Gandalf comes over to Middle-earth on a boat. That's it. And it's super boring. In the same way that, like, Galadriel spends most of the Second Age hanging out in a forest. That's super boring. The question will, if they continue the way they are going to continue, the question will become, hey, do you like this fan fiction, fill in the blank, history that the show is writing? And if you do like it, amazing. I like parts of it. Yeah. If you don't watch the show. And that's kind of where I'm at this point, because there are parts of this show I absolutely love. And if we can continue producing those parts that I think are the strongest, most potential good parts of the show, I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
If they don't learn from their mistakes in the first season, I think it is going to be a long...
It's going to be a long 50 episodes if they get to that point.
If they get to that point. And you made an interesting point, I think, a couple episodes back, where there's a chance we don't get all 50 if it is not as well received enough. I don't think we've warranted a cancellation by any means. I think there is still quite a lot of potential for this show.
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, first of all, to tie off on the Gandalf point, he also says in the Lord of the Rings movies, he says, go back to the shadow. And in this episode, he says, from shadow you came, from shadow you shall return, or something like that.
Oh.
So
I totally missed that.
Look at me dropping all these Lord of the Rings bombs on you, Don Marshall. These pearls of wisdom. So anyway, yes, it seems he is Gandalf. The word Gandalf is not spoken in the entire show, but it seems like he is Gandalf, and that's what the show is indicating. In terms of whether there'll be another season, I only dare speculate. I have no...
Oh, no, there will be. They've started
No,
season
yeah,
two.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. In terms of whether they'll make it to 5 seasons.
I
I can only dare speculate. I will say that this show is the most expensive television show in history. And it needs extremely high quote-unquote ratings, according to streamers, in order to justify that expenditure. They've already greenlit season 2. They're already making season 2. That is a sure thing. But I think that what a show like this needs to do to survive for 5 seasons is it needs to impress, entertain, delight people like Don Marshall, who are super steeped in the books, right? But it also needs to bring in people from outside of that circle. Right?
100% agree.
It needs to bring in the general audience.
Yes.
And if it cannot do that, if the storytelling is so impenetrable or baffling such that it cannot do that, then challenging decisions will need to be made by the people who are making the show.
I agree.
Which is like, should we continue seasons 3, 4, 5? Should we continue them but at a much reduced budget, as an example? You know, that's another thing that could happen. If the show's not getting the kind of ratings that they need to survive. So
may I make a counterpoint to that, though? Because you said something that being a Tolkien lore person that I am, I hesitate to use the word expert at any and all points for myself, but I have spoken with quite a number of people who are lore experts who don't like the show, but a lot of general audience members who do like the show. So while I think there are nods to like, hey, Mr. Lore Expert, did you see that? We used the word Astari. I'm like, yeah, that was cool. I appreciated that. I don't necessarily think I am the target audience for this show, nor should I be. I think the question that I think the showrunners, the writers, the everybody involved kind of needs to, and I'm sure they've already done this, right? I'm just sort of reiterating for our audience. I think they need to look at who enjoyed the show, and where things maybe fell a little bit short, and improve upon them. And it really, I think, is that simple. Now, are the solutions simple? Some are. some are not.
Yeah,
and I think those are the difficult decisions that you were talking about that need to be made.
I think my broader point is that like it just needs to appeal to a very wide audience. That's kind of what I was saying. And time will tell whether it has done that, but certainly I would say from, we all live in our individual spheres of like who's talking to us about what. And I would say like from what I hear, like it's quite mixed out there. There's people who love the show, and there's other people who are like, I don't, I feel it's quite mixed compared to other shows that I feel like are more, I would say House of the Dragon, the uniformity of praise I hear for that show is much higher. I would say. Fair. Same. But the other thing is that's not enough. Here's another example. Andor, a show I love. I don't know that many people are watching the show. Everything I've read about the show is very positive, but I don't know that many people are watching. I don't know if it's capturing the zeitgeist. Right. So you can be extremely good and not capture the zeitgeist. You can not capture the zeitgeist, or you can capture the zeitgeist and not be very good. Ideally, this show is both, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if it will hit that. We'll see. I
don't think we've hit it yet. I think it has the potential to do so. Also, we completely forgot to mention that Sadok dies. Rest in peace, Lennon.
I talked about him watching the sunrise.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
yeah.
We spent so little time on it. I'm sorry. Listen, it's been a very long 8 weeks, folks. I can only apologize.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, so shall we move on to the Eregion plotline? Okay, Eregion. Elrond and Celebrimbor discuss that they're running out of time from the evil that's spreading all over the land. All of a sudden, Galadriel arrives. Halbrand is in terrible shape. We learn there's some debate about how long did it take them to get from Númenor to the Southlands? To be fair, they weren't making the same trip. They're going from the Southlands to Eregion, right?
Yes.
So she says they rode 6 days without rest. So that's roughly how long it takes to get from one place to the other. Right?
David, I do feel I didn't include this in the show notes, and I apologize. I should have. I do feel the need to defend myself slightly from not doing some work. I went viral about 6 months ago. Actually, longer than that. I went viral back in 2021 about when I calculated exactly how long Frodo and Sam traveled from the Shire to Middle Earth in exact miles.
Wow.
As close as I can. And a part of me was like, oh my God, I should 100% figure out how long, how many miles it takes, because I have all of that math in a Google Doc. I can just trace the path. And there was a part of me that went, I don't want to do that. And I didn't, and call it laziness, but 6 days, yeah, sure, seems about right, I guess, on horseback. Fine.
All right.
That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
So they show up at Eregion. Elrond is there, and Galadriel and Elrond reunite. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember. They hung out in the first couple episodes. That was kind of nice to see. So anyway, they need to repair Halbrand. There's kind of this cool scene where they get Halbrand into like this hospital bed, and there are these people around him healing him with elvish medicine and stuff like that. I like that.
Yep.
Then in the next scene, Halbrand is completely fine. And he's talking with Celebrimbor, right?
Yeah.
So
there were some choices there. Give him a limp, make him clutch his side, have him start bleeding a little bit more. It's like, I guess I'm not completely ready yet. Sorry, got it back to bed. Sorry, Celebrimbor.
It's kind of like, I don't know, it just feels like the show's not giving us a good sense of time. Like, 2 episodes ago, what's his name? The stranger could barely speak the common tongue, right? And then now he's like completely fluent in this episode.
I take that as like the veil being removed from his from his mind, but like, yeah, no, I see that.
Fair. Anyway, okay, I retract that that nitpick. So Halbrand meets Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor's like, he seems to know who Celebrimbor is. Celebrimbor is like a legend, right?
He's pretty famous. Yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
And Celebrimbor's like, man, I really wish I
Oh God.
This part was hilarious. Like the entire episode, like them trying not to say ring in the entire episode.
Oh God,
right? Where Celebrimbor was like, if only there was a way to make more with less, and all this. I was like, this is very silly, I think. And what should we make it into? A sword? A scepter? Perhaps something round. something round that fits on someone, like a
Darling, fetch my thesaurus. I need to find some synonyms.
What's a round object that can fit? It was like, I mean, I didn't mind it, honestly.
Oh, no,
I thought it was a little,
fine.
it was a little silly, but it's like kind of, it did feel like potentially, like intentionally winking at the audience about it.
One of those give me the meat and give it to me raw moments.
Exactly.
You remember?
So I was like, yeah, that's kind of funny. But anyway, Halbrand, who, as far as anyone in the show knows, is some random guy in a life raft, is able to crack the whole thing wide open. Celebrimbor like, I don't know how to solve this problem. And Halbrand is like, have you tried combining elements together? And Celebrimbor's like, holy jeez, I never would have thought of it. Celebrimbor, of course, one of the greatest alchemists of all time, is like, holy crap, oh my god, this is freaking brilliant. Anyway,
I want to preface my thoughts on this real quick by saying,
yeah.
I've met Charles Edwards. I've met Charlie Vicker. They're both great guys.
Yes.
I think they did a phenomenal job acting the crap out of this scene.
Agreed.
Because there was a moment that I was like, oh, okay, I'm right about Halbrand. But there needed to be a moment where he goes, there is a method of forging in the Southlands where we have this technique.
Right.
Let me show you.
Yes, something.
And we didn't get that. And I'm just sitting here like. For those listening on the podcast, I'm falling in my chair in frustration.
Yeah, something that's not just like, hey, did you think about combining these things? You know, like something that's more than just that, because otherwise it makes Celebrimbor look like a dope. You know, it's like
he did. They wrote him a little differently than they probably should have. And that I say that knowing that they have completely not rewritten, but they have taken Galadriel's character and changed it significantly. I never got the sense that Celebrimbor was not a master craftsman. That was established by Elrond in episode 2. I wanted to see how good he was. Yeah. And it's one of those show don't tell things where they told us that he's a great master craftsman. We didn't really see that, and it wasn't backed up by the dialogue, which
Well, he comes up with this thing of like, they want to create a power not of the flesh but over flesh, which at the time I was like, no, they're not really just saying literally on top of flesh, are they? But I think they are. I think they're just saying they want it to be on top of flesh. Is that what?
No.
Okay.
A power over flesh, over the unseen world. That is directly, like, almost word for word what Adar said to Galadriel.
I see.
So a power to over meaning control of.
Okay, good. Good. I accept that explanation. Not physically over. Okay, good.
Listen, this show is on the nose, but not that egregious.
All right, fair enough. So, but then they debate like what form should it take, and a scepter, a sword, a crown, maybe something smaller than that.
Small rocks, churches, a duck. That's something smaller, like a float. Yeah. Sorry, that's a Monty Python.
I got better. Anyway. So Gil-galad's like, this is madness. We can't do any of this. And Elrond's like, look, give me 3... I thought he said 3 weeks. It's 3 months? He said 3 months, right?
I think it's 3 months.
Okay.
Listen, the pacing...
A very short period of time.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
A very short period of time.
To be fair, 3 weeks to elves is like a long weekend. It's like
nothing. Right. Gil-galad agrees to give the elves some time to build this crown out of mithril, basically, right? Mm-hmm. By alloying it to other materials that they have access to.
I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but sure, carry on.
And around this time, Galadriel asks the elf scholar for records of the kings of the Southlands because she has some doubts about whether Halbrand is really the king of the South, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost as if her character arc of realizing she shouldn't be jumping to conclusions is coming full circle.
Yes.
Finally.
Yes.
All
finally.
right.
Okay. Well, before we get to the dream sequence, anything else to say about this kind of lead up to the formation of the rings?
Yeah, this part of the show I actually thought had some potential. It's one of those parts that I think, oh, cool. This is this is good. There's a couple of things that are on the nose, and yeah, we don't need 17 different words for round objects, but the way they're sort of handling it, because I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the stuff that the elves specifically did, the Gil-galad and the Celebrimbor stuff, but I thought this was handled okay. I think they need to make a couple of changes to Celebrimbor's character, because there's some conflicting show versus tell things that we've seen. But I would love to see more elven interaction and sort of where the creation of these rings lead to, because there's some spoilers, obviously. That
I have spoiler questions to ask you at the end of the episode.
Yeah. We'll get into that.
We'll get to that. Okay.
Yes.
Before we move on
to the dream sequence.
Yeah. Don, if people are enjoying our conversations, they want to hear Don Marshall talk more about Tolkien's work throughout the rest of the year. Where can they find more of your work?
If you would like to spend the next 2 years desperately hoping that season 2 is good, you can find me at Don Marshall 72 on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitch. I live stream. We do watch parties for this show. I might do an 8-hour marathon with a friend of mine that's never seen the movies, so he's going to watch this first. And I'll be very curious to see what he thinks, both having never seen the movies and binging it instead of watching it week by week, because I think that's an interesting aspect to this show that might make it a little bit better. But we'll see. So join me on, oh God, I forget what I already said. TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, and wherever books are sold.
Yeah, at Don Marshall 72. I would really, I strongly doubt this will be the last Chen Don Marshall collaboration.
Oh no, I'm not going away just yet.
How it goes. Yeah,
unless you fire me because I do something.
No. I really love working with Don, so we'll figure out a way to work together again. But I've really enjoyed working with Don, and if you've enjoyed listening to him, I hope you'll follow him on all his other stuff, because obviously he's a delight. So
thank you.
And yeah, just a quick shout out for Decoding TV. We're obviously still covering House of the Dragon. Andor will be covering through November. We just concluded our coverage of She-Hulk this week, and there's going to be more shows on the way.
How about that? Sorry, we're off base a lot. I loved that She-Hulk finale.
Okay, good.
I thought that was
well,
brilliant.
Then don't listen to our episode about it.
Oh, no!
But anyway, so find all that coverage at podcast.decodingtv.com, and thanks to all the paid members at decodingtv.com who make this work possible. Mm-hmm. All right, Don, let's get to the dream sequence. I thought this was actually, like, from a craft perspective, this is really, really well done. Like,
brilliant.
So Galadriel confronts Halbrand. Like, Halbrand comes in, he's so excited. He's like, guess what? We figured out a way to make the rings. And Galadriel's like, there is no king of the Southlands. And she takes out this scroll that's like, the lineage of Southlands people died out long ago or whatever, right? And then Halbrand's like, I've been around for a lot longer than you think I have. And
that was one of the parts that made me think, okay, there's a couple of lines in here that I'm like, that's it. That's the Tolkien part. And it was, what was it? I wrote it down. I have been awake since before the breaking of the first silence, and in that time I have had many names. That was great. I loved that. I cheered during that part. It's a great line.
It's a good line delivered well, yeah.
Yeah. I have props to Charlie Vickers for this portion, because I know there was a whole question of like, is he, isn't he? I was right. He is. But I thought he did a great job. For that.
Let's talk about how awesome this scene is, and then I will say some things about it that are not awesome. But let's start with the awesome stuff.
A compliment sandwich.
Yeah. First of all, I thought it was like she tries to like stab him like right there. She's right there, from the jump. She tries to like kill him right there. And then he knocks her out of this reality into a shadow mind world, her mind palace or whatever. And that's like it was a really cool, like, oh my gosh, he's so powerful. He was able to like knock her out of this reality back into a flashback.
Yeah.
And you see she's back home, where we saw in the opening scenes, and she meets Finrod, although it's not really Finrod. It's probably Sauron speaking as Finrod, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool. It's disorienting. You're like, what's happening? And you get the sense that, of course, she would want to see Finrod, the person that she's been doing terrible things for this whole season on behalf of.
Terrible. Debatable, but carry on. Sorry.
She literally saved Halbrand from death.
Yeah, she didn't realize that was a terrible action in the moment. I know the outcome wasn't great. The intention was fine. And, hopefully,
yeah,
after getting canceled, she will learn from her mistakes.
Yes, indeed. So anyway.
It's called character growth, David.
Thank you so much. And Finrod whispers into Galadriel's ear, touch the darkness once more, which is actually Sauron saying, hey, come touch this darkness. That's kind of what he's inviting her to.
Not a euphemism. I saw a couple of people that were like, oh, they're getting sexual. I'm like, no.
That would have been so interesting, though. I do have to say, I think that would have been pretty, because there's kind of like this almost romantic kind of feeling between them 2 episodes ago, right?
I didn't quite read into it as a romance, but looking back on it now, I think that's kind of what they were hinting at, but it felt very one-sided in that Halbrand was like, hey, girl, thanks. Appreciate you. And Galadriel was like, I'm married. We didn't learn that till episode 7.
Yeah, we didn't.
It's fine.
So they're back on the raft where they first met,
Yep.
And Halbrand then proceeds to explain everything about the show, like what happened.
Yes.
Morgoth was defeated, and then you know what? Don, can you explain?
Yeah.
How Halbrand came to be in this situation?
So here's what I will say, and I mentioned this before that I was going to get into the sort of could you choose to be good and evil when it came to the stranger? And I misunderstood the question, but at the time I was sort of thinking you were asking, could Sauron choose to be good or not?
Right.
And the answer is yeah. So this is a little bit of obscure Lord of the Rings fact, not a spoiler for anything, just some background information. Sauron, as well as Gandalf, the rest of the wizards, the Balrogs, they're a creation of the god in Tolkien's universe. The god is named Eru, and these spirits are called Maiar. Or Maya, excuse me. One is singular, one is plural. I don't remember off the top of my head which is which. But these Maya were basically shape-shifting spirits. So, Gandalf wasn't always an old man. Saruman wasn't always an old man. The Balrog didn't always look like that. They were spirits. And in being spirits, they can change form. And Sauron takes that form change a bit. There's a part in the first age where he transforms into a vampire bat. There's a part where he turns into a werewolf being. So the idea of Sauron sort of being able to change who he is a consistent theme. And there is a line in the Silmarillion, which is the book that sort of explains the backstory, that when the first age was over and Sauron was basically on the losing side, I found the exact quote. Do you mind if I read it?
Please go ahead.
Okay. When Sauron's Master Morgoth is defeated, there are hints that perhaps Sauron could actually feel that remorse. And it says, Sauron put on his fair hue again, fair in this case meaning gentle or pleasant to look at. He abjured, which means renounce. I had to Google that. He abjured all his evil deeds, and some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the Lords of the West. The Lords of the West being the Valar. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that, Sauron did actually feel bad about what he did, even if it was coming from a place of, I don't want to be thrown into the same jail that my master is. So, could it be that Halbrand did feel remorse initially? Yes. Does he now? And going forward? No. No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. So, that's all useful information, Don, but I think just to kind of clarify a little more, Morgoth was defeated. Sauron is kind of in this period, I guess, where he's trying to figure out what's next for him. He's in this transitionary period where he's between jobs.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out he's trying to figure out what's next for me, right? And he's like, I'm going to one of the problems of the season, in my opinion, is that we have no access to what Halbrand's actual plan is. I went back actually before we recorded this, and I rewatched all of his scenes with Galadriel in the first part of this season, and all that happens in those scenes is Galadriel saying, "Let's go to the Southlands," and him saying, "No, please, leave me out of it." That's the whole thing. But you don't know what Sauron actually wants to accomplish, and that's the problem. Is that yes, Sauron proposed like, "Hey, come be my queen." Really well done. There's this amazing shot that everyone loves, including
brilliant.
you in the show notes of like they're standing on the raft and the camera like kind of does this twisty thing and you see the reflection and it's that iconic sort of Sauron silhouette that we all know from the show and from Lord of the Rings, and he's standing next to Galadriel and it looks super cool. It's like a great shot. Amazingly done. So again, all the stuff with this dream sequence, love the artistry behind it. Also, I was thinking about it from a production perspective. I was like, they probably had to film this scene at the same time as they filmed the opening scene of the series. So, like, there was some planning that went into it of, like, hey, like, two critical scenes with Finrod happen under this tree, and, like, we need to get them both done now. So, so I liked all that part about it. I think the problem is we don't really know what Sauron was thinking this whole season. And so when he makes the offer of, like, come be with me, like, we have no... I don't know. Like the whole season, he has been trying to not be evil again. I guess like
no, I don't think he's trying to not be evil. I think I read it as this. I think the showrunners were trying to imply that at a certain point, he was trying to be good, and Sauron believes that what he is doing is good. Right? Most bad guys think that
what is he doing though? Is
he's trying is he
the one that's infecting the trees in the Elven lands? Like, is it like that's what I'm saying? Is like I don't know what is his plan right now?
He wants to ensure peace through slavery, basically, and subjugation, and be a ruler. And you get a little bit more of this, and this is kind of where I think they lost non-book readers. And even non-movie watchers, if there are any out there, in that Sauron just wants to be in charge. The world would be right because we've all seen that. Wouldn't the world be so much better if I were in charge? And in this case, Sauron goes, "Yeah, I 100% should be in charge. Look at the world. Morgoth's gone. It sucks. I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it by uniting everybody. And those that disagree with me can get out. And unfortunately, the get out involves a huge war. So, surprise, Morgoth's gone. There's a big battle.
Yeah. Again, I'll just say this one last time, which is that, like, I think taking the character from I'm the King of the South to what you just said in the course of one episode is a lot,
Yeah, it almost reminds me of a certain person that was a rightful ruler of a land, and they kind of rushed the ending of making her... I mean, excuse me, I don't want to... Daenerys. Sorry. I was making a Game of Thrones reference, and I lost the thread halfway through.
You say that, but there's a lot of... I get a lot of Game of Thrones Season 8 vibes from this show. And this show is in Season 1 right now, so...
Which could potentially be a good thing, because then they can actually learn from their mistakes instead of ending on...
Don's like, they're going to get it all out of their system. That's how it works.
I'm grasping at straws as it is, my friend. Let me have this.
There is a... I like the idea, like, it's a cool idea of Galadriel, like, putting this guy in charge of everything, and then, like, I went back and rewatched the scenes, and he's like, hey, please don't put me in charge of this. And he basically says it to her like 8 different times. She's like, let's go. We're going to take the Southlands. And he's like, I don't want no part of this. And then she's like, let's go. We're going to go to the Southlands. He's like, please, I'm begging you, don't do this. And then she's like, let's go. We're going to go do it. And then, they go do it. And, what is clear, by the way, is that Adar says he killed Sauron. Obviously, he didn't kill Sauron. He thought he killed Sauron. But in the earlier scenes... Halbrand does say orcs drove me away. He was telling the truth. They were Adar's orcs though, right? Like not, and he was driven from his homeland. So like presumably like Adar is basically kind of like a mutinous faction within like Sauron's kind of people. Basically.
One of Sauron's so actually it's interesting you bring that up. I don't think Adar and Sauron are on the same side anymore.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I believe that's true.
Yes. Yeah.
Like at the very least, Adar is an enemy of Sauron who or is a competitor to Sauron. That's kind of how I imagine it, right? Yeah. So, but it all reminds me of this article from The Onion in 2002.
Oh no. 20 years ago.
Here's the headline of this article from The Onion. 18-year-old miraculously finds soulmate in hometown. And this is from Peshtigo, Wisconsin. In a miracle that defies statistical probability, Corey Muntner, 18, reported Monday that he found his soulmate, Tammy Gaska, right in his very own hometown of Peshtigo. They say God puts one special person on this planet who is your one true love, says Muntner, who has left Marinette County twice in his life, both times for marching band competitions. It's incredible, but I somehow found mine right here in this town I've always lived. If that's not fate, I don't know what is, end quote. Why did I think of this article, Don Marshall? It's because if you think of Galadriel's story, right?
Yeah.
She's heading to Valinor. Yep. Things are going great, right? And then she's like, oh my gosh, a meteor, a sign of danger, who's actually basically a sign of... What she didn't know was he's actually good. She should have done that, you know? But
I don't
she's like,
think
okay.
Galadriel expected the person to be in the meteor. I'll be honest.
It's like, a sign of danger, I'm getting off this ship. So she literally jumps off, finds this guy on this raft in the middle of effing nowhere. And then it's like, oh my gosh, it's the king of the South. Coincidentally, it happens to be the king of the South. Let's put some armies behind this guy. It's basically like that big of, hey, your soulmate happens to be in your hometown. Same thing of in the middle of the whole ocean. In the middle of the whole ocean, it's this. It happens to be the king of the South, who, by the way, let's give him tons of resources and save him from death multiple times. There is something deliciously ironic about her literally having this guy dead to rights multiple times. At multiple instances, she could have just killed this guy. And then not killing him because she thought he was actually a good guy. There's delicious irony in that, but some of the coincidences feel more some of the things feel like they happen because the plot needs them to happen, as opposed to organically driven by the story. One of them being she found this guy on a raft in the middle of nowhere. Is that a nit that I'm picking? Is that an unreasonable nit? That's a legitimate question. I'm not being sarcastic.
No. That's not.
Is this how it happens in the books, Don? Is this how do they meet on a raft in the middle of nowhere in the books?
As I have mentioned before, this show is a lot of the fill in the blanks. And then we will get to the stuff that Tolkien wrote about. Whether or not you like that fill in the blanks involving rafts and swords that need blood and tunnels is totally up to you. How did you find that Onion article? 2002? I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm still laughing at that part.
Yeah. So anyway, Galadriel says, no, I'll never succumb to your wits. Even though we've seen her spend the last... I mean, it's it's very cliche, and I don't think it's very well set up, but it's a cool idea of hey, come be my queen. You understand why that might be enticing to someone. But not for Galadriel.
The whole abusive relationship thing was just totally glossed over. No, everybody else hates you. Only I see how great you are. Only I see your light. That is straight up abusive behavior right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Elrond pulls Galadriel out of the water, and she's like, oh my gosh. And then she almost cuts Elrond. It's like, prove you're Elrond and you're not in some dream sequence right now.
Yeah.
And then he says where they meet, and it's a very sweet moment that they have of
that was nice. I like that.
That's nice sweet moment. Yeah. So then Galadriel does not disclose what happened with Halbrand.
I don't blame her for that one. I
agree. Some people brought up problems with this. I actually didn't mind because it would make her look really bad.
Yeah.
It would be like I'm just gonna throw it in the other example, Don. It would be like someone hosting a Lord of the Rings podcast and not bringing up the theory that Halbrand is Sauron for 6 episodes. I'm just throwing just a random example that comes to mind. That's not applicable.
Nothing completely unrelated to what we're talking about.
Completely unrelated to what we're doing here. Yeah. So
sorry,
she doesn't tell anyone about it, and then they decide to make the rings anyway. and it's like, hey, maybe 2 rings is not enough. It's too much. 1 ring is too much power. 2 rings is too much conflict. But 3 rings, perfectly balanced.
Just like the founding fathers did for our systems of government, and nothing has ever come.
Nothing has ever gone wrong with that.
Nope.
It was smooth sailing for us after that happened. So.
Honestly, it seems like we've been smooth sailing since 1776. Really,
no, there's been no challenges of any kind. So then they make these rings. My understanding from reading them was from reading about it is like 1 is air, 1 is fire, 1 is water, and they have color coding to indicate that that's the case.
They do, yes. So this is Nenya, Narya, and Vilya, the 3 elven rings of power that we eventually see in the movies. 1 goes to Galadriel, 1 goes to Elrond, and 1 goes to Gandalf. However, they might not, depending on how they.
1 goes to Gandalf. Gandalf's not an elf, though, is he?
No, there's actually, I don't know if they'll do this in the show. I think they might, based on another character that may show up in season 2. There are some rumors.
Well, it seemed like the 3 of them would be Elrond, Galadriel, and Celebrimbor would be holding the rings based on this,
So if
based on what I saw on the show, I'm probably wrong about that. I'm just saying, like, that was my impression watching.
You most likely are, and if they do it the way you think it is, I will be very upset. So let's just leave it at that, and I won't spoil too much more.
Mm-hmm. So they forge the rings.
It was a very beautifully shot scene.
Like nice, cool, like them making the rings. And
has that been the mission the entire time, Miles Teller? You've been saying for weeks now. We bring up what's the mission? Here's the Top Gun Maverick. It didn't feel like they necessarily earned the creation of the rings. It wasn't the.
Well, Don, the creation of the rings happens in like approximately 15 to 20 minutes of screen time in 1 episode, right? They didn't set up. I guess here's what they did do a good job of setting up. They did do a good job of setting up, like, hey, danger is about to overtake the land. We need this mithril to protect us.
Yes.
Like all that stuff is like pretty well established.
That stuff is set up. Yes.
Yeah.
I think though I wanted to see them spend more time on it.
On the rings, it's because it's like it feels pretty important. And I have more questions for you in spoiler section.
Oh, absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
To the rings, the show called The Rings of Power that you might want to spend. To quote Ian Malcolm, eventually we will see dinosaurs on this dinosaur tour. Eventually we will see Rings of Power in this Rings of Power TV show. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
did we see a Game of Thrones in this Game of Thrones? Is there a house made out of dragons in this show? What's happening?
It's a good question. Okay, anything else that happened in the episode before we get to spoiler section? I will say there is a thing with Elendil
and Miriel.
Elendil, Miriel. They go back to Númenor. The king is dead, which I guess we're supposed to think is a little sad. There's a cool sequence with Aarion, who's like drawing the king, and then the king like thinks that she's the queen regent. Which, by the way, also happened in that other show where the king died.
Oh no!
And then she kind of goes into the place of the Palantir, and then she like takes the veil off the Palantir, but we don't see what she sees, and that's kind of the last we see of Aarion this season, right?
Yes.
There's also a scene with Elendil and the queen regent on the boat where they basically kind of say, hey, you have to swear we're going to keep fighting against the evil, and that's basically it. Right?
Question for you here, David. Did you take any like romantic tension from those two in that scene?
A little bit, a dash of it.
I wasn't sure if I was completely off base there. Just because, in the interest of full disclosure, this isn't really a spoiler. That is not something that is found in the books. There's no real relationship or interaction between those two in any meaningful way like that. But personally, I think that would be a very interesting sort of character arc for those two, and seeing how like the loss for Elendil, we know it's not total loss, of Isildur, who we don't see this episode either. He's just chilling underneath that house, I guess.
That's what I'm talking about when I was saying earlier, like, this episode is baffling. Like, no tie-up with Isildur, who we know is alive, Nothing with Elrond and Disa. Nothing with Bronwyn and Arondir. Durin and Disa, sorry. Durin and Disa. And then...
I mean, they're basically a throuple at this point, let's be honest.
But here's the big problem, Don Marshall, is... what happened with Kemen? Did he ever find a nice young lady to get with in the show?
Kemen was standing behind Eorien when, blink and you miss him, because it's literally only one shot. And again, this brings in, it's like, I get that they shot these things in different locations and weren't sure how they were going to put it together all at once. So when they cut and paste to make 8 episodes out of these story arcs, it felt like, oh, right, we need to show Númenor in episode 8. Would this show have been a little bit easier would that specific scene have been a little bit easier to digest had it been in episode 5 or 6? Probably, yeah. And it feels like the pacing has just become that they shot everything separately and tried to cut and paste things in there. And the Númenor stuff felt, especially in this episode, felt like they were just sort of, bloop, there's Kemen, one scene, bloop, there's Eorien. Where's the Isildur? I don't know.
So, any other thoughts on this episode? We have there's some spoiler points I want to discuss with you.
Yes.
But I guess this is probably going to be how we wrap up this season on the main feed. There's going to be another bonus episode as well. But we're at the end here. The 3 elven rings have been forged. Halbrand goes back to Mordor / Mount Doom. He's just like, time to go back home, I guess. And that's where we leave that character. And
an interesting visual as well, kind of, again, a nod to the movie. Frodo and Sam walking towards Mount Doom at the very last scene, and we get Halbrand, Halbrand, however you want to call him now. I don't. It will. How do I say this? It will surprise me if we see Charlie Vickers again in season 2, but it would also not surprise me if we see him in Mordor, but see him in other forms elsewhere.
I see. So you're saying he's not going to be Halbrand anymore. He's going to be some other form, probably.
I think we've kind of established that this guy can change who he is very easily. It wouldn't surprise me if they bring in a kind of shapeshifter portion of the lore to this character. But that is one of the things that I think has a lot of potential. Overall thoughts on this episode, though, it was fine. It had its issues. Some things felt unearned. Some things I felt they did a really great job on.
Here's my question for you, Don. I mean, you've been looking forward to this series for a really long time, years, right?
Yeah.
And now that we're at the end of season 1, like, how do you feel? What has been your experience going through it? I'm very curious, like, because here's my perception of it, is that this series has really like activated the hive around Tolkien and his works in a way that you are deeply embedded in.
Yes.
And that it's been like a joy for many people to kind of see these big moments that have never been depicted before on screen, or these places that have never been depicted before, like Khazad-dûm, see it depicted in its glory. Like, we've never seen it really on the big screen, or in its full glory in the way it's rendered in the show. But what's the experience been like as you look back on the last couple months? Like, are you like, man, that was an incredible journey, I'm so glad we went on it, or are you like, that was mildly disappointing, but I'm so glad we went on it, or like what is your kind of feeling as you reflect back on this season?
I'm glad this show exists. I like the show. I had a lot of fun watching it. I'm thankful that the discussion around it, for the most part, has been, let's look at things critically and, offer improvements or suggestions where we think it didn't necessarily work. And it's been really nice being back in the Tolkien community again in a way that really I haven't gotten a chance to experience since The Hobbit. And I recognize that, like, this is a very different beast, and we're here in 2022 and the expectations were so high, but I very much tried to temper my expectations for this show, and they met them in some places and they didn't in others. But I think overall, I'm going to watch season 2. I'm probably going to get excited for season 2 leading up for it, because I see the potential the show has. And I think that it could be something really great. I think I said to you, if not on the podcast, then off camera, that this show has the potential to be the next Game of Thrones, that in the way that it was the sort of cultural catalyst or jumpstarter. Did this season feel like that? No, I don't think they've gotten there yet. I didn't expect that to be the case. And I think I'm hopeful that I can sort of look back on all 5 seasons and say, rough start, but yeah, they got their feet under them. They recognize their strong points, like the Doran Disa Elrond storyline, that line of writing. They trimmed the fat where it needed to be. You don't need that many main characters. Let's make these storylines a bit more compelling in the places where they need to be, and really hone in on that. I got to give a lot of props to Bear McCreary, who did the music. Phenomenal job.
Agreed. No disagreement there. It's incredible. It's been incredible.
Fantastic job. The cinematography was great. The landscape shots were wonderful. I thought especially the close-ups on the ring, the creation of the ring, the cinematography there was great. The music was great. And regardless of whether or not I feel it was earned, I think if I can go back and watch that scene sort of in a vacuum, thought it was very well done. And I think the thing that the show did for me, at least, was it made me curious. I'm not at the point where I think, it's not worth it anymore. I'm still curious to see where these characters go. I still care about the characters, for me at least. I know many don't, and there's too many and I'm losing track. But for me, yeah, the show is fine. I think it has met my expectations in some places and failed in others, but that's kind of what I was expecting. I thought the hype for this show was a little bit too much, but on both sides. The hate for it was too much, and the excitement for it was too much. Did I sort of fall into my own trap of, ooh, I'm a little excited fanboy? Absolutely. And I kind of figured I was going to do that at a certain point, especially after episode 6, which, if I'm being honest, I feel like they should have stopped there. Just from a storytelling standpoint, I think if you end it there, season 2 is like, yeah, season 1's a lot of setup, but the end episode is like, oh, it's great. And then you go to season 2. They didn't do that. That's fine. I'll move on. And I'm very curious to see what they will do in season 2.
Yeah, this was they gave an interview to Hollywood Reporter recently, I believe, if I recall correctly, that they were like, season 2 is when things are really going to get good,
Yep.
And it's just like,
they've been saying that for a while. They said that even before. They said that at Comic-Con. They said that at interviews. It's like, this season is the setup. We have to know how did they phrase it? They had to know what's at stake. They had to know what could be lost.
I mean, a couple things. First of all, there's another show that was covered on the Decoding TV podcast network this week that also had a similar finale where it's like, but season 2 is when we're really gonna do it, And it's like, okay, well, you could have just made season 1, what you wanted it to be instead. And I think that if their goal from season 1 was to like get you really invested in this world, for me it failed. For other people, it has clearly succeeded, and I am really torn about here's the thing: I love hopping on the mic and talking about the show with you. It's super fun.
Yeah,
I am sensitive to the fact that some people don't like that.
Oh,
like what I mean by that is like they don't want to hear me like ragging on the show for the problems that I think it has, and I do wonder, like, okay, if we cover this show again next season, like, should we pair you up with somebody who's like more into the show? Because like people don't want to listen to like people crap on the show. I don't think that's what I have done, but I can totally understand if you listen to it, you're like, I'm tired of David Chen's negativity. I think this season has been overall. There's been some great moments, but most of the time it has been, in my opinion, a narrative failure. It has failed to like get me really invested in most of the characters. It has failed to make me feel like the events in the show are motivated by characters, or that like the idea behind most basic storytelling and screenwriting is like one action needs to be because of the last action, right? Like something happens because the last thing happened.
Yeah.
Why did Galadriel meet Halbrand? Because she randomly encountered him in the middle of the ocean, right?
Yeah, Galadriel Halbrand needed to already be in Númenor.
Right, or something like that. Like
yeah.
for it to feel like this I don't know why they didn't do it that way. You know, that it's a very reasonable approach they could have taken, where it's like it makes more sense. There's this guy named Halbrand who everyone talks about. Like, have you heard? He has said he is the king of the South, or whatever. Like, and I'm making up dialogue like that, but if once you say I'm good in the show, like you've surrendered your ability to have the higher claim on who's writing better dialogue.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so I think in terms of bringing in a large group of people and getting them invested in this world, I am curious to see whether it will be successful or not. My guess is no. My guess is, from what I've seen in my limited sphere, a lot of people are like, they feel like they've given this show a chance, and they're like, okay, we'll see if season 2 gets better, but if not, like, I'm out.
Yeah.
That's kind of been my perception. That might not be your perception. But anyway, my point is, I also recognize if you're listening to a Rings of Power podcast, you probably like the show. And so I think maybe there's a different way we could structure the show where, like, you have a co-host who's really into it, and it's more fun that way, potentially. I don't know. Let us know what you think at decodingtv@gmail.com. I will just say it has been super fun to walk through it with you, and and even though I feel like, and I'll just say this also finally about like each individual plotline. Like some of the plotlines I think like have been pretty strong. When the plotlines are strong, it's when I feel like we're experiencing genuine emotions between the characters. So I'm talking about Elrond and Galadriel. I can like feel there's like warmth there, right? Elrond, Durin, and Disa. Durin and his dad. Like, those are all plot lines where I feel like I can sense that there's a relationship with texture in there, right? Most of the stuff with Galadriel talking with Halbrand, like, all of it feels so plot-driven. It's like we're doing this because we need to get to the next thing, to get to the next thing, to get to the next... and it doesn't feel like this is what a character would actually... Why would these people trust... Galadriel, I guess yes, because they saw the dream with the flood flowing in and stuff like that.
The flood, the flowers, there were reasons, but
then to go from that to people are just dying to get on board the ship. You need a little bit more texture to this world to like understand why people would behave in this way. And I don't feel like the show delivered that texture. It felt like people mashing action figures together for the most part, and like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if ... is what it felt like for most of the season. So ultimately, the experience of doing Decoding TV with you, covering Rings of Power, has been a delight. The experience of watching the show has been a disappointment, but I'm grateful to have had the opportunity. And so thank you. If you've listened this far, you've probably listened to a bunch of other episodes.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that, and a big thanks to Don for joining me for this journey. So Don,
thank you for having me. No, this has been lovely. It's been, and honestly, it has been kind of refreshing to talk to someone from who has an industry perspective and isn't just like fanboying with me about the stuff that I like. Because it keeps me honest. I can't be too like happy-go-lucky in this, and I think.
It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay, you can find more episodes at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Find us on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube at decodingtv. Thanks for listening, and we're about to get into a spoiler section of the show. So here we go. But if you don't want to listen to spoilers, you should stop listening now. Thanks so much for joining us this season. Keep it tuned into Decoding TV for more in the future. We'll see you later. Well, one thing here's another nit I didn't pick during the show, by the way, that I'm just going to throw in here. Which is... they at one point they're like, hey, we need Galadriel's dagger to like form this thing, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading this review and it pointed out, like, wouldn't there be tons of stuff in like Eregion that's made from Valinor?
No, not necessarily. Actually, right. that specifically, I wasn't crazy about the fact that it felt a little bit rushed, but yes, that is when the war happened. The orcs stole everything from the battlefield because they're pillaging and just it's a massacre. So there's very little of stuff from the Undying Lands in Middle Earth.
Okay, I have several questions. Question number one: in last week's episode, you were like, something happened in episode 7 that made you realize for sure that Halbrand was Sauron. What was the thing?
The thing
we are full book spoilers from this point forward. So
full book spoilers. Okay. Am I allowed to swear in this part? I am assuming that.
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I knew that little shit was Sauron from the moment I saw him on the raft, because this show's writing has great moments, but his second line of dialogue, his looks can be deceiving, and I'm like, I don't trust him. It might be Saruman, but I'm like, no.
Sure.
Because in full book spoilers.
Yeah, we covered that last week, by the way.
Yes,
yeah,
we did.
Yeah.
Sauron goes to Númenor because he gets captured by Ar-Pharazôn, because Ar-Pharazôn goes to Middle-earth to try and colonize it. And I thought that it would have made a little bit more sense if Halbrand, Sauron, was already in there, because it's like, oh, well, the battle has already happened. We have already captured this guy from Middle-earth, but he turned out to be a pretty good dude. He's a blacksmith. And by the way, he's corrupting us because, spoiler alert, sorry, I feel very passionately about this. You've let me off the leash. Where to even begin? Sauron has another form called Anatar, and Anatar is this fair elven looking smith that helps Celebrimbor. So as soon as I found out that rather than stay in the Southlands and heal, Galadriel immediately went, I need to get him to this guy. I knew that it was going to be the Anatar, Celebrimbor making the rings, but instead it's Halbrand and Celebrimbor making the rings. And I went, okay, well.
So that's the thing that happened in episode 7 when she's
yes.
like, I need you need Elvish medicine. We need to get you back. That's when you're like, oh, that's the way they're going to go with that
yes.
plot.
As soon as Galadriel said, I need to get him to Lindon, I went, okay, Halbrand is going to be in the same room as Celebrimbor. There is absolutely no reason to get him there unless he needs Elvish medicine, which is not clear from anything we see on the wound, and the show has been bloody and gory enough, and we didn't see the wound, and there's no way that he could have ridden that horse with a septic gut thing unless he's a freaking angel. Like, oh. Sorry. I got very confused there for a second and was just like, yeah, that's the moment I knew.
I've read some stuff online about how the way that they have chosen to do the rings is really weird, because my understanding is in the book. So there's 3 rings for the elves.
3 rings for the elves.
7 rings for the dwarves. Is that right?
Yes, 7 rings for the dwarves and their halls of stone.
9 rings for the men, right?
Yep.
And then 1 ring to rule them all. But my understanding was it's incredibly important the order in which the rings were forged, and like the show is playing with that somehow. Is that correct?
Not necessarily the order, but the idea that Sauron never touched the elven rings. And he still didn't. He still doesn't know that they are making the elven rings, right? He didn't get his hands on them because...
Well, I mean, they were
actually, that's a lie. He does know they're making the rings, but his magic, his dark malice never touched them. So Sauron... and is potentially...
Which, for why, though? Like, he was there, right? Like, he just decided to peace out, I guess, right? Like, in the show...
I read that as he didn't want to take the chance of Galadriel revealing his identity and them not making the rings, being, him getting captured again, him not being... Because, Sauron, he's one dude. He's powerful, but, like, an entire elven army... 1v1000 would probably be enough to take him out. I think maybe we're going to see something like that in season 4 or 5. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yes, that's how I do. As soon as I've had my suspicions, and as soon as they brought him to Lindon, I'm like, cool. This guy I think might be Sauron.
So I get that. But back to my question of like, I guess, what is your feelings as a book reader on how the show did the Rings of the Elves? Like, because I read some stuff online that's basically like, this is really weird and rushed, the way they did this. It does feel to me like, hey, they basically do it all in the course of this one episode, but it feels like it should be a bigger deal, and maybe it shouldn't be. I don't know. Like you tell me if it should be a bigger deal.
The thing that you have to keep in, that I always try to keep in mind in the Second Age, is that we don't have a lot of context for stuff, right? We have, well, I guess I shouldn't say context. Let me rephrase. The thing we have to keep in mind about the Second Age is that we have the broad strokes of events. Celebrimbor and Anatar create the rings, but there's no dialogue about what they said or how they did it, and so this is just one of those moments where if you disagree with the direction the show is taking, that's just you disagreeing with that decision. It's not necessarily, well, this didn't happen this way. It's very much a try to keep in mind we don't have as much detail about it, and that's kind of how I've gone into every episode. Did it feel rushed to me? Yeah, I feel like they could have spent more time on it, and that could have been the season 2, episode 2 or episode 3. It's like, we got the Mithril, we figured it out, we took the time to know what to do. Thanks, Halbrand, for all that help, by the way. And then the season 2, episode 1 opener could have been like the, hey, surprise, we've been working together for so long. Yeah, it felt rushed, but it's not necessarily in the books.
I am baffled by the decisions they made this season. Like the Halbrand's deception. First of all, completely removing Halbrand culpability at all from the whole situation is really weird. Like, so it makes it.
How so?
Well, what I mean by that is, if it was up to him, he wouldn't have gone back to the Southlands at all. Right?
I disagree with it. Can I before, because I think I know what you're about to say, but I think I read into it a little differently.
Sure, I went back and watched all the scenes, and he was fighting Galadriel every step of the way to not go back to the Southlands. Now, maybe he would have gone back there eventually and figured out a way back there eventually, but like in the context of the show, if Galadriel had done nothing, I don't think Halbrand would have gone back to the Southlands and made Mordor or whatever, you know. Like,
I saw that as Sauron playing into the deception side and sort of making it somebody else. Sauron's name is Sauron the Deceiver, right? So he is deceiving people into making these decisions. And I read that as even Sauron knows he probably can't just say, all right, I'm going to activate Mordor, I'm going to do all of this. Like, he's taking his time with it. So I always read it as Sauron is convincing other people to do the work for him, right? No, please don't make me king of the Southlands. I want to stay in Númenor. In that sort of sarcastic way, he's doing it.
Well, first of all, doesn't seem to be sarcastic when he's saying it. And in fact, Charlie Vickers has said he didn't know he was Sauron when he was acting in the early episodes of this season. So I think it was all earnestly done. What? Okay, here we go.
Oh God, are you serious? Are you serious?
Oh God. The Rings of Power finale. Even Sauron actor didn't know he was Sauron at first.
When you say at first, what does that mean?
I didn't know for sure until the beginning of the 3rd episode. That's what he says. We filmed the first 2 episodes. The show went on hiatus because of COVID.
Right.
Then towards the end of the hiatus, the show ran so he is not in Númenor until the 3rd episode. So I guess you're right. You could be right there. That like
okay,
you know.
Okay, I'm not necessarily trying to justify that action, but that does not seem as unreasonable to me, knowing what happened with COVID. So
he says, I did have an inkling, if I'm honest with you. My last 2 auditions were reading lines from Richard III, and we know he's not the greatest guy in the world. And then the other audition lines were from Paradise Lost, where you're literally giving the speech as Satan. So that gave me an inkling that there was something up. I was definitely suspicious, but it wasn't confirmed until right before we started filming the 3rd episode, end quote. So okay, fair enough. It's not when he is in Númenor and talking to Galadriel, he does know that he is. So, okay, fair point. But he didn't know in the first 2 episodes. He did not know in the first 2 episodes. But anyway, my point was, and I guess I should have made this point earlier, is on the podcast, is it does feel like we spent all this time with Bronwyn and Arondir when we could have spent it figuring out what Sauron's plan was and whether he's going to achieve it, what it's like to forge these rings of power, what that actually means to forge these rings of power. And instead, literally everything I just said felt super rushed in the last episode. Right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not something that we see in the books. If we're going full spoiler territory, right? There's never really a mention of, and there is a battle fought in the Southlands and Mordor explodes. It's basically just like, yes, Sauron used Mordor as a sort of hub. Then he created another place. We see that in The Hobbit. It's called Dol Guldur. the Hobbit movies, I should say. I don't know if we ever actually see it in the books, but regardless.
All right. Don Marshall, there's been multiple times during the season when you're like, ooh, I'm holding myself back from saying anything more, but now I am curious if there's anything that sticks out in your mind that you really wanted to discuss or...
Yes.
Yes.
A lot of the things I was holding myself back on was...
Yes.
There's a character named Anatar. He's going to work with Celebrimbor.
Right.
And that's probably... Anatar... The name Anatar is Sauron. That is the name he takes, and the fact that we didn't see it there...
there's probably not going to be an Anatar character in this show, right?
There's a very good chance we don't see it. I feel like maybe we might... Here's what I will say. I think that there was a little nod to Anatar when Halbrand said, think of it as a gift, or however he says it in the line, when he's giving the gift of his knowledge, this information, because the name Anatar means bringer of gifts. So it is possible we will see a different actor, maybe be a shapeshifter, because Sauron can shapeshift. We might see him more in season 2. We might see Celebrimbor fall into the trap of working with him again, not realizing it as him because he calls himself Anatar. He looks different than Halbrand's character. And it might be that direction they chose, but I'll be honest, they have changed so much already. I don't necessarily know what direction they're going. And that is, I know the major points that they probably want to hit, which is what makes me excited for the later seasons. I just don't know how we're going to get there.
Question about Gandalf.
Yeah.
So Baron TW on the Decoding TV boards,
yes,
is clearly a very knowledgeable about Tolkien, right?
Oh yeah.
He made this comment a few weeks ago, or they made this comment a few weeks ago. Matt on decodingtv.com was posited maybe the stranger is Saruman, and that was a theory that was going around too. Baron commented Saruman and Gandalf are the same age in that they are both Maiar, so both created at the same time before the creation of the world, and both of them took on human form at the same time in the Third Age. The difference is more their relative power as individuals, and Saruman was appointed as the leader, and so allowed to use more of his power. When Gandalf comes back post-Balrog, he's been allowed to use more of his power in human form. Radagast is the third sent with them, but there are 2 sent earlier. I won't say more than that to avoid spoilers, but based on how fast and loose the show's taking it, the stranger could well be Gandalf at this point, which is totally the show jumping the shark. That's what Baron TW says. Then I said, why do you think it's jumping the shark if Gandalf is the stranger? And Baron TW says, as a book reader, I am not a fan when it breaks established lore, and Gandalf does not arrive until well into the Third Age. He isn't present when Isildur gets the One Ring, which is clear in Lord of the Rings. He certainly isn't around when the rings are made. He doesn't recognize Bilbo's ring as Isildur's, as he arrived 1,000 years after it went missing. He's a character we know a lot about. He's getting his ring when he arrives in Middle-earth as a choice by Círdan to give it to Gandalf and not to Saruman. But conversely, I'm really enjoying it when the show grabs a character we don't know much about or creates one that makes sense. The show then has the runway to do whatever it likes to do and create an interesting story. The Blue Wizards are an example of where they could do this. Lots of space to work. They have an arc in that we know what they did. We know in that what we know is they did their job and then went AWOL by the Third Age. Hence why Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast get sent. If they make the stranger Gandalf, it is a marketing decision, not a storytelling one. It is people knew him from the Peter Jackson movies. A blue wizard is an interesting option as they can invent 99% of the story around it while still fitting in with established lore, whereas Gandalf is the opposite. End quote. What say you, Don Marshall? Has the show destroyed the Gandalf lore? It sounds like, based on our conversation earlier, you don't feel that way, but what do you think of Baron TW's comments?
Has it destroyed the lore? No. Has it changed it for the better? Potentially. Again, we spent all episode wondering, so now we actually get to see what Gandalf does. Gandalf's story is barely written about, right? He comes over on a boat, and Círdan the shipwright gives him the Elven Ring of Power. Círdan holds one of the rings. Tolkien also had several different versions of when the wizards come over. He changed his mind about the blue wizards' names like 3 or 4 times. So to me, that kind of playing fast and loose with the lore doesn't bother me, because really all we have established in the Silmarillion is the stuff that his son Christopher took and put in the book. He very well could have taken other stuff that was completely different and put it in there instead. Because there are so many like Sauron's a cat in one of the early drafts of the Lord of the Rings. He's known as Tevildo, the Prince of Cats. So has it destroyed the lore? No, it hasn't.
It certainly changed the lore.
It changed the lore, but in the same way that they're changing Galadriel, I'm fine with it. There's really not much there, and they can do it in another way that is hopefully more interesting. Because, like, look, if we were to have the established lore, Galadriel's not in it. She's chilling in a forest. She has a baby, and spoilers, Elrond marries that baby.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. Like, do you think that's going to happen in the show?
Unless they do a time skip, which I don't think so. No.
Everyone's been saying, hey, when is Elrond going to get with Galadriel's babies?
They might not. And because of the timeline compression, the fact that they're introducing Gandalf in the Second Age instead of the Third, I feel like they're just going to ignore it. It's like, that happened during the Third Age and we're just not covering it. Don't worry about it. It's not really that important unless you want a baby Arwen cameo. And we could theoretically see Elrond go through even more emotional trauma because of what happens to his wife, which if I can explain that if you'd like, but
it's up to you. It's up to you. Whatever you think.
The thing is, it might not be relevant to the story. It's just piling on more trauma for Elrond. His wife gets captured by orcs, and the way that they torture her is basically enough for her to say, I know we're married. I know we've got kids. I'm done. I'm out. I'm going back to Valinor. Bye. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's terrible. And you could theoretically just, and this was one of my ideas from the start, you needed to make the show about Elrond, I think, or make the show about Galadriel and have that person be your through line. I know there's a lot going on, but there's too many characters. So I think Elrond needs to be your through line character, or Galadriel.
Well, I think, I think Galadriel, Morfydd Clark seems like a very talented actress. She has an amazing look for this character. It's very distinct, very striking. But most of the performance has been pretty one note. Largely because of the script. Largely because
I think a lot of that has to nothing to do with Morfydd Clark's
nothing to do with her abilities. It's just more it's been intensely determined for most of the episode. And this episode was only really when we got a hint that there was more there. Because
I feel like I got a little bit of a hint in episode 7 of her changing.
Oh
her
yeah.
ways
No,
of
that's true.
realizing
That's
her
true
mistake.
too.
But I agree.
She was like, I've made a huge tiny mistake, and then this episode I've made a huger tiny mistake.
Yes.
With
I definitely want to see more growth from her in season 2.
We forgot to mention in the main episode, Don, that Elrond discovers. Elrond also knows about the thing.
That's right. Elrond knows.
Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, hopefully you've listened to this far and you got it. But yeah, I mean, so that's interesting to see how that's going to play out next episode.
But,
Anyway.
Yeah.
It's. But I'm also like, okay, so Galadriel's made this massive miscalculation. I mean, Dawn.
Go ahead.
If we learned today on this podcast that this whole time, the last 8 weeks, not only were you not who you say you are, but you've been actively working against me the entire time and lying to me, that would take me, I'm not exaggerating, weeks if not months to recover from. I'd be really questioning myself, and really angry at you probably, and really, I'd have a lot of different thoughts. And I don't know that we really see that in Galadriel this episode.
No,
I don't. If I had come this close to killing the person I've been trying to kill for the last however many years, and then wasted it because of my own stupidity, I would be really, really upset about that. And we didn't really get that. Again, I think this is a script. I think Morfydd Clark can deliver that, but I don't think that the script really allowed her to, and that's very disappointing to me. So when you say Galadriel should have been the main character, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm like, the character has to go through more than what I think we saw this season.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. When I say that
Yeah.
Galadriel or Elrond should have been the main character, I mean rewriting everything.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ever going to do that, nor do I think it was even the most plausible option, because the Second Age has a lot of different moving parts, right? It's not necessarily narratively the best thing, but like in the same way that the prequel trilogy in Star Wars should have been about Obi-Wan, I am of the opinion that
Right.
the again, that was an opinion thing, but like prequels focus on the Anakin Obi-Wan relationship, but then we see just Anakin stuff, and then we see just Obi-Wan stuff, but like probably would have been a little bit better if we hadn't seen all the Anakin stuff, unless Obi-Wan and Anakin. That's a different.
I mean, the show took this show, Lord of the Rings, took the kind of Game of Thrones approach. We're going to check in with all these people, but it's like, it is hard to write one arc that is good, let alone 6.
Yep.
And the show might have tackled a little too many arcs.
Yeah.
And it didn't have to tell it did not have to tell the story this way. Did not have to tell the story this way.
No.
It could have just been like, yes, it could have been, we're following Elrond. Every scene has Elrond in it. That it could have done that for the whole series. Didn't want to do that, and we can judge how successful it was.
Yeah.
Anything else, Don? So I feel like I brought up the main things. The Halbrand stuff.
Yeah, no, that's it.
The Gandalf stuff.
The Celebrimbor, Anatar stuff. Yeah.
Right. And the ring stuff. You're not bothered by like how the rings are like. I don't know. I could have sworn I read online somewhere about like that the fact that these rings were formed before, like, or that they were supposed to be formed at a certain time or in a certain order, and that like, that the way they've done it in the show is kind of breaking the lore, or a departure from the lore in some way.
Look, there's been a lot of departures from the lore. In a lot of this,
okay, how about this? What are the departures that you think have worked the best, and what are the ones you think have been the least successul? I'm curious.
I think
how about that?
Adar is probably the strongest. The strongest part of the new made-up lore.
Is Adar a character in the books?
Adar is not a character in the books. No.
Oh,
Adar is
so
not
he's
a character in the
completely
books.
just
Completely
fresh
made up.
show invention. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
I like that.
I do too. I think, honestly, I think the whole Southland stuff, because we don't get as much detail. Arondir's not a character. It's Amazon only. Bronwyn isn't. Theo isn't. But I like the Bronwyn-Arondir relationship. I don't necessarily know what they're going to do with them in season 2. That's why I said I'm curious about the show. But
I don't think the showrunners knew what they were going to do with them at the end of season 1.
That is entirely possible. That's entirely possible.
Because they don't show up at all. Okay, anyway. Yep.
Anyway, yes. So,
yeah, so Adar, you thought worked. You liked the
Adar,
Arendira,
I thought Adar worked very well. I thought visually, the Númenor stuff worked. I didn't like him at first, but now that I've heard a couple of theories, I feel like Kemen is going to be cannon fodder for the eventual civil war in Númenor, which we can talk about a little bit more because, like, David, I don't know if you picked up on this. Not so great stuff happens to Númenor, and they've kind of already revealed what's going to happen to Númenor.
The flooding? Tell me the flooding. I see.
So there's a big
flood.
That
is a prophecy.
Yes. I wasn't crazy about the fact that they already showed it. They've been hinting at it. The sea is always right, in that kind of like, well, if the sea is going to drown you, the sea had a reason to drown you. And they kind of took that as like, there's a Poseidon-esque type character that's one of the Valar, the gods in the Undying Lands, that they kind of hint at. And Eru, the god, is like, okay, yeah, we can do that. But yeah, I think Adar was handled very well. I think the Númenor stuff, for all its faults, was pretty good in terms of like spoilers and setup and new stuff that they added. Like Aarian's not a character in the books, but I'm very curious to see where she goes, because her and Kemen both feel like devices that will lead to further the plot.
Right, because she's theoretically going to see the Palantir, and who knows what's going to happen.
She's going to see the Palantir things. And again, it kind of sucks because it feels like, rather than doing what Adar is, in that it is an unexplored part of an unknown character, but rather a concept, they're not changing anything. They're adding on to it in their own way. Some of the stuff feels like it's a change and a departure. Now, a lot of that doesn't really bother me because I'm just along for the ride. I'll enjoy it or I won't, whatever. But I know that can affect a lot of people that care very deeply. And it kind of sucked because we did get into a little bit of like the gatekeepy kind of stuff where it's like, no, it has to be done this way. So I think the way that they handled Adar was very good. But the stuff that they didn't handle as well, I liked the Galadriel storyline. I didn't necessarily like the final result. Finding Halbrand on a raft was not nearly as strong as being introduced to him in Númenor, because that wouldn't have been as much of a departure from the lore, because as we know now after 8 episodes, Sauron is already in Númenor corrupting the people, and that happens in the books, and to a lesser extent that happened in the show, and he sort of had Ar-Pharazôn's ear for a little bit and became a smith and started like showing them all of these great things. That stuff happens in the books too. I think it would have been cool to see that rather than I'm on a boat.
I'm on a boat, mother. Anyway, got it. And I see you have not mentioned the Harfoots at all, Don.
Harfoots aren't in the books. I think the excuses that the showrunner gave are really loose, and I've had the pleasure of meeting both of them. They are great guys. I think some of the ways that they handled the answers to why are there hobbits don't show up during the Third Age was incredibly trite, and they could have handled it a lot better. I liked the Harfoot story. It's fine.
Got it. Okay.
Underwhelmed.
All right. Well, we're going to try to do one more bonus episode next week. If you have any questions, decodingtv@gmail.com. Send them in. Any other things you want to discuss? I'll also look at the decodingtv.com boards as well. And anything else that pops up. There's going to be stories, written interviews, stuff like that. We'll probably just talk about a lot of the reaction to the finale in season 1. So
send me your cues.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, everyone. David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.